wherever you are in the world. Um, Welcome, everybody, to this new webinar, which is hosted by Extra, the Existential Threats and Risks to All working group of the World Academy, in close cooperation with POP, Protect Our Planet, a very large and important youth movement headed by Ash Pachauri, who will be co-hosting with me. Welcome, Ash, first of all. Ash, would you like
So
to say
much.
just a
I'm
few
so
words about the pop? Most of our viewers will know about Extra, which is
thank you.
for those perhaps who don't know from your network, it's an initiative about providing a one-stop information hub on all the absolutely best information on the full spectrum of existential risks. So it's a place where policymakers can get the quick overview, have guaranteed high quality information that covers the spectrum. And you need to know the spectrum because all those risks, we believe, interact in a sort of situation of polycrisis, as we call it. And therefore, policymakers have to have that overview, that bigger perspective, and we try to provide that. But over to you, Ash, and tell us a little bit about POP to those who don't know.
Thank you so much. This is truly an honor, and I'm delighted to be with you and several members of the pop family here today. So the pop movement, where pop stands for Protect Our Planet, is a movement that was envisaged by my father, Dr. R.K. Pachauri, who led the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as chairman for 13 years. And he was very convinced that it was going to really take a groundswell of action led by the youth of the world to address the pressing issue of climate change, and that the real solutions would come from young people and young people and their action to address climate change on the ground. So the pop movement was born in 2016 with the goal to mobilize the 1.8 billion youth of the world to take knowledge inspired action to protect our planet. So the idea being that the science of climate change would be pivotal in guiding solutions implemented and led by the youth of the world. And 10 years on, here we are. And we have young people all over the world. But I also want to say that it's a very rapidly closing window of opportunity. So time is of the essence, and scaling solutions would be critical. Of course, I'm really excited about the conversation that we're having here today, which will cover several actions that young people are taking and
Mm.
all the challenges that need addressing, like yesterday. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ash. And from our perspective, as sort of group of experts who are focused on existential risk, we are very, very aware that younger generations face a far greater likelihood of being impacted by these existential risks. And we do the work we do primarily for the younger generation, not so much for us, though, of course, it's very possible that somebody my age, which I won't disclose, uh, might, I still do expect to see quite a lot of these impacts of climate change, say by 2050 or so. Um, it will be, it will affect everyone today, unless they are really in their 80s or 90s, we'll see quite a bit of it. And yes, but for young people, it means it will affect the larger part of their lifespan. And that is a big difference. And it creates a different perspective. Uh, it holds a different meaning. And that's what we would like to explore today. And like Ash said, it's urgent. We we really are running out of time, especially on climate change, but also on other X risks that are on the horizon. Um, now, when we look at those horizons and listen to the climate experts, they're also shifting. We're now hearing, for example, recently there was a whole flurry of news on um, the Atlantic Ocean circulation system, which, has enormous consequences for climate. And the data that's coming in now is saying that no, it's not next century, it's this century, maybe mid this century that we'll see dramatic change there. Same with, Antarctic ice loss and all the sort of scientific data that's coming in that we're monitoring is suggesting that those horizons are changing, shifting, coming closer all the time. So I wanted to, first of all, before I asked a question, just briefly, Ash, if you could introduce your team, I would like to begin by introducing Lorenzo Rodriguez, who's the editor of our newsletter. He lives in Venezuela. He's a political scientist and also international relations. He's a Fulbright scholar and has many skills and absolutely key member of our team. Welcome, Lorenzo. Now, over to you,
Hi.
Ash, Ash, if you'd like to introduce your team too.
Thank you so much. Absolutely delighted, Lorenzo. It's a pleasure. And in fact, I wanted to say that we have a, a room filled with young leaders, and one from the Pop family, Ricardo, who is also from Venezuela. He's not in he's not in Venezuela as we speak, but yes, he's from Venezuela, as is the rest of his family. Rick's currently based in Brazil, and is studying there. So I just want to say that we're delighted to have you, Rick. Thank you very much. And we have Kamal, who's also a brilliant young leader, originally from Nigeria. He's based in Turkey, also doing incredible work with young people. As are all of the youth who are joining us here from the pop movement. Kamal has been actively involved in work both in Nigeria as well as in Turkey. But since he's based in Turkey right now, he's been doing a lot of advocacy and also research. He's studying in Istanbul as we speak. I'm delighted to introduce Philo as well. Philo is another brilliant young leader who's based in Chennai in India. She's been working with the pop movement in various different locations. She's done a lot of work in Mexico as well. And talking of the AMOC and the ocean warming, she's done a lot of work on sargassum, which is one of the areas we've been focused on research. Uh, where these algae blooms are occurring in mounds and mounds and mounds and creating huge challenges with certainly with coastal communities, livelihoods, health, and again all the existential threats that come with climate change, which of course creates many different dimensions of challenges for all of us. And you're right, Professor Thomas. I mean, we're facing the implications and the impacts of climate change as we speak. So in the years to come, certainly uh, present grand challenges, and we need to tackle them. Again,
Yeah.
like I said, like yesterday, we do. I think Adanze has dropped out of the call to come back in. She was trying to get her video to work. She'll come back any minute.
That's
Adanze is
fine.
another young leader from Nigeria. She's leading some of the pop initiatives based in Nigeria as we speak. So just to say that there's sort of a mix of skills here, lots of research, lots of implementation,
Mm.
and some very strong voices from young people in the room. And
Okay.
thank you all for joining. Rick,
Yeah.
Kamal, Philo, and Danze will be here in a minute. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, Kamal. Lorenzo also spent some time studying in Turkey, and I wanted to just comment briefly just how much mobility there is in this group of young people, and that's something your generation, has in your favor. You've this ability to travel and see different parts of the world and develop a global perspective. And I think that's one thing, it's not just that your situation is different, but your life experience that you bring to that is also quite different. I'm a bit perhaps exceptional for my generation. I was a very big traveler and, I've spent time in many different countries, but it was still rather uncommon. And the generation before that, to them, this would have been unthinkable, that kind of mobility. But anyway, just a few words to introduce myself. So my active research in recent years has been on food systems and the impact of climate change, water scarcity, also inequality on food systems. So that's where I've sort of, on a purely empirical research level, kind of plug into the whole thing. We all have multiple lives. Anyway, let me just ask you all a, a question that concerns me very much, and it's about what is these days called eco-anxiety, and it's something that apparently has uh, a lot of impact on young people, and not only, but more so than others, than older people. And I wanted to ask you about how you experience that. I know that in the pop movement's recent climate health book, it was mentioned. Um, but how do you see sort of, say, the climate crisis, other sort of threats? How does it impact people's mental health or their general sense of well-being and security? And how do you cope? How do you cope with that kind of prospect? It's hard to imagine. I mean, when I was in your life stage, there were also concerns. There were sort of dystopian ideas, but it was more in the realm of fantasy, except perhaps the atomic war was a pretty acute threat. Maybe more so, oh, maybe not. Hard to say whether it's become worse. Right now, it's probably worse than ever. But um, there was a lot of utopian kind of hope, a lot of positive ideas about the future, a lot more confidence. If you look at recordings now from the 1970s, say, and just the excitement and enthusiasm, the confidence people, it's quite different. So tell me a little bit about eco anxiety in your experience and in your circle. Could I start with you, Philo, perhaps? Would you like to comment a little bit? How do you feel about it? Is it
Uh,
something, how does it manifest?
Thank you very much, Professor Reuter, for having me here. I personally think the term eco-anxiety is kind of, it could be seen as a term of privilege because climate change is not a foreseeable threat, but it's already a lived reality affecting the mental health of people, especially the youth. If you look at countries in the global south. So I've seen how individual experiences to extreme climate events like heat stress or flooding is already aggravating and exacerbating the helplessness that youth already feel. If you take my geography in Tamil Nadu, the southernmost state in India, last month alone, based on the live meteorological data, it was found that the 95% of the world's hottest cities was in India on one particular day. So the heat we have been experiencing has been unlike anything we've ever seen, shattering all records. So a survey done in our city with the youth, college going graduates, we found that heat exposure disrupted their daily life. It affected their focus, affected their academic performance, with many of them reporting difficulty in even sleeping. So there was increased irritability, frustration, and stress. So this is a form of anxiety that is something that's being manifested around. And when I first joined the pop movement back in 2019, climate change was when I first learned about climate change, the Paris Agreement. So the narrative that we have been told is we have to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. If not, the coming generation will face a huge threat. So I have always looked at the impacts of climate change as something that's very distant. That's something maybe 30 years down the line. It's not something that we have to worry about. Maybe small island developing states, maybe coastal communities, but not us actually. So in 2023, with the pop movement, I had the opportunity to visit the COP28 in Dubai, and it, like all climate conferences, the resounding narrative was limiting warming and safeguarding the future of the coming generation. So it was I found it to be very optimistic because of the representation of the diversity of the people who were there from different. There were indigenous communities, people whom you never see being represented in conversation in conferences like that, with a lot of representation of young people. So I came back with such optimism, filled with that, people are taking steps towards this at multinational level, at subnational levels, and at the community level. And a week later, in December 2023, it was the monsoon season for us, and one of the district in my state received more rainfall in one day than it usually receives all of the year. And it is something that's difficult to share for me, but I lost my very close cousin to flooding, and it hit me like a thunderbolt that day, that climate change is not something that's abstract, it is at your doorstep. We have already been experiencing flooding events in our hometown, so much so that it has become a norm and we have lived with it. But it is starting to bring in casualties, it is starting to affect your day-to-day functioning. So in this, when you have all of this defining your reality, how are you going to plan for your life? So uh, so I don't know. For me, coping, I cannot comment on how you can plan or prepare to deal with climate anxiety, but coping with it is understanding that, one person cannot change the systems. There are a lot of like-minded people who are working towards it. So I've made it a point to look at the positive stories out there, question when things are, not as they seem, question the injustices, but make peace with the fact that what you are doing should be enough to keep with your peace. So that is how I have personally come to terms with it, and I think it is a process that the young people will have to go through sadly on their own and come to terms with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Philo. Those are very important points. It's, the fact that we're no longer just talking about anxiety. Maybe in some countries it's still largely anxiety, but in others it's actually eco-stress, not eco-anxiety. And in some it's eco-harm, serious injury, like you mentioned the sad fate of your cousin. And we've had the same here in Australia, these extreme weather events in Queensland. We had regions that were alternatively sort of affected by heavy drought and then and bushfires and then flood and then drought again and flood again, and it's yeah, and it comes to a point where it really destroys communities and ecosystems and everything. Yeah. So anyway, if I might just ask Kamal next, if you don't mind, uh, because I wonder how in your country these sort of you know is it still anxiety or is it already stress? How do you see the situation there, Kamal?
Thank you very much for this question. Over the years, I've been trying to understand what this concept is all about, especially to see how young people are trying to cope with this situation, which is really something that is been underestimated. For example, as someone from Nigeria living in Turkey, I see climate anxiety not simply as a fear, but about how we cope with it, especially from the environmental point of view. And also as a broader crisis of uncertainty for many young people, especially in countries already dealing with economic instability, Nigeria or Turkey, is very challenging. Also, we can say it's also about institutional challenges, and this climate change intensifies these existing insecurities and creates uncertainty about the future. For example, going back to Nigeria, I can say that it's already affecting everyday life in very feasible way. And we can see how flooding has destroyed homes, schools, roads, and farmland in many regions. And that's the issue of food crisis, which continue to rise partly because of environmental instability, and also it affects agriculture and supply chains. Communities, especially those that depend on farming, are increasingly vulnerable to changes with this weather patterns. And also there's the issue of drought, displacement. At the same time, people are affected by food crisis, which also makes it difficult for them to go to school. What I can say is that what is often overlooked is the psychological effect of these growing environmental issues. When young people really witness instability around them, and it changes how they relate to the future. I remember my conversation with my fellow Nigerians in Nigeria and also in Turkey, where I'm based now. We always talk about flooding, where people like spoke about immediate like survival skills. For example, in some parts of Turkey, although in some parts of Nigeria, it is more about emotional exhaustion, where building becomes like a crisis. And also it is more about family losing their businesses and homes. It becomes unstable. Also looking at it from Turkey's point of view, where we normally deal with people from different countries, we have noticed another dimension of climate and crisis-related anxiety, where we have earthquakes. I remember speaking with some students and young people where they said this crisis has changed their lives and understanding of safety and control. Some even began to question their lives, and they say, "Where do you want us to live?" Because of this fear of climate issues and earthquake. So what makes this difficult for young people today is that this crisis is no longer feeling like being isolated, but it's more about like climate disaster, economic instability, and pandemic. And we can see how Turkey is in between different countries. We have wars and also we have migration pressures, and also political polarization, which is happening simultaneously. So what I can say is that this is really a serious problem, and the people are feeling it, especially young people. And as someone that is living in Turkey with people from different part of the world, I can say that we have this worry of economic instability and also climate vulnerability. And I can
Yeah,
say
so
that it's something that we really have to address.
I was going to actually probe you a little bit on what the feeling is of young people in Turkey on about the Iran crisis, because that's another existential risk. You know, we have had quite a bit of atomic weapons saber rattling in the region. It's not inconceivable that, say, Israel, under certain circumstances, might use an atomic bomb. And similarly, Russia has mentioned the possibility in the Ukraine conflict if Europe became even more heavily aggressive in its support for Ukraine. So, you know, how is that affect? It's just next door. I mean, surely, and Turkey is kind of has stakes in this conflict, and indeed there is quite a bit of tension also with Israel. How do people feel about that? And on top of everything else, on top of climate change, and what does it make you feel about the, you know, where the political leadership is taking us in this crisis, time of ecological crisis, and what are people talking about? What's the conversation like there?
Yeah, actually, the convention is more about where do we belong now, and how are we going to be in the next 5 or 10 years. So some people are thinking about moving to other countries. Some people are thinking about moving to other cities that have close borders with other safe countries. So which is really like more of a dangerous aspect of eco anxiety, and at the same time the issue of polarization. And it becomes more of like, should we be optimistic or pessimistic? So it's really like there's a lot of questions, and even when young people feel guilty discussing this issue because of fear of or emotional exhaustion, because they feel like it's making them weak. And now even like especially what happened a few days ago in Turkey, where there was a serious earthquake in some cities. Some even moved to other cities like Istanbul, Ankara, and other big cities. But at the same time, we even ask ourselves if these cities are also safe. Because last year we experienced like earthquakes even in Istanbul and Ankara. So it's really scary. And also with the issue of Russia-Ukraine war, a lot of people moved to Turkey, which also created like so many problems, and people even felt at that time that really like whatever happens in other countries, like it's more like it's happening in Turkey. So even now there was this fear like last year, also the beginning of this year when Iran, the US war started, people started thinking about now they will have migration crisis. Already they have climate issues, but still in some ways there is hope, especially now that we are going to have COP in Turkey in Antalya. So it also like
That's true.
yeah.
With
So people
Australia
are
as
thinking about
co-host,
like
actually.
yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
So people are thinking about addressing these issues, and already, as far as I know, there are some institutions here, for example, Vision Africa, and some other institutions here are thinking about going there to address this issue. So we are just hoping that this will change.
Okay. I was actually, since we're talking about the sort of geopolitical issues, and we have two people from Venezuela who are kind of part of that same story in a way. Ricardo, would you like to share a little bit about your experience, about the general sort of anxieties of your generation in Venezuela about climate change and other threats like that, but also then the geopolitical turmoil and yeah,
Yes, of course, Thomas. Thank you. There's actually 3 points that I want to bring to the table, and one is vulnerability, segregation, and disparity. We know that climate change will affect us all, but it's important to know that it won't affect us all equally. Why? Because different countries got different methods and different resources to face the climate risk. A wildfire occurring in Venezuela won't be treated the same way as it's, for example, occurring in California, or if it's occurring in Istanbul. And it has to do, yes, with the geopolitical situation of each country. We know that climate change will affect specifically vulnerable groups. And Venezuela and the Venezuelans right now are part of that vulnerable group. Just important to note that Venezuela was the first country in the world to lose all its glaciers. And that's something key that nobody was talking about it. And for example, the solution at the time that the government provided was to cover the glacier with plastic, in short words. Let's say that either that decision was informed or not, those were the resources that they had. One thing that we got right now is that interconnection. We're all interconnected, and that allows us to have a lot of knowledge going on. The problem is that as a state of war, is how I always put it this way, it's very difficult for people to think about what's going to happen in the 20 years. People are thinking what's going to happen tomorrow, and that's happening actually in all war countries, in all countries that are facing very hard situations or dictatorships in many ways. So that's the thing. Climate change will affect us all, but won't affect us all equally. Just to give you an example, and it's also very important. We talk about climate change. When we talk about climate change, we always talk with facts, with numbers, with data, and it's difficult to gather data, for example, in Venezuela. We don't have data. We don't know exactly what's going on. That's where a community perspectives become key. Just to give you an example, yes, we got some information coming from Venezuela, but actually, the scale how it's being analyzed is very limited in comparison to how can be, for example, analyzed in France or in any other country. But just to give you an example, in Valencia, Venezuela, my home city, we have this community that it's referred to as the Calvary. As you can imagine, that name has a lot to do with how people are actually living there in that community. They experienced a lot of wildfires some time ago. I think I might point out 2020, but they were not addressed by neither by the government nor by other communities. It's actually a very neglected community. It's wonderful to know that Lorenzo is also from Valencia. But the thing is that when we see that from outside, you will understand that there's a wildfire. We imagine that we're going to have people taking care of that. No, it was the whole community taking care of that wildfire because they live at a very mountain in a very hot city, I might say. And there's also a problem. We see it from outside, we don't see it from inside. Well, how about the minorities? There are kids that have asthma, and there are people who have mobility issues. Imagine the stress and the anxiety to live there. with community members, because I work in that community a lot of time, that they have each time we have the heavy rains, because in Venezuela we're a tropical country where they have a lot of heat or a lot of rain. And when we got a lot of rain, pretty much the month time, they start facing landslides. And just to pinpoint that, when they start facing landslide, the solution for the people living in the community was taking sticks and the tool they got so they can, in a way, cave their way around their houses. So that's not a lot of there's no dignity in that, and there's a lot of problem, but nobody's talking about that, and we don't have the data of that. It's even hard for the people that work in that community to gather the data of their own community members. Because those are issues that don't want to be known. And that's just Venezuela. How about the other countries? We got hundreds of countries right now and hundreds of communities right now. And it's also very important to pinpoint that, for example, there's members of even in the climate action community that, for example, are taking into consideration or opposing for some countries in Africa and for some communities in Africa to be paved, to have some pavement. But yes, it's very confident, comfortable to say that when you, for example, are in Sweden, it has a lot of infrastructure going on. That's not the same case for every country. So how can we talk about climate change without acknowledging and addressing the inequalities? Because we need to understand that we are not facing this from the same position that other people are facing. It won't affect us all, but it will affect us all. It will affect us all, but won't affect us all the same way. I just want to add that.
Kamal mentioned before pandemics and the food crisis that came with a pandemic. For one, it illustrates how different risks are interlinked, but also I actually wrote a paper about the COVID pandemic and inequality and the fact that more people were killed by hunger as a result of the pandemic than by the actual virus itself. And it's complex. It's not just that countries don't have so much food, but there was also, especially in Africa, a lot of speculation with food that, people don't know that, for example, that the UAE and other countries in the Middle East are the big importers of food in Africa, and then they resell it. And the prices for wheat went up like 400 or 500% in Nigeria, maybe only 10% in England or in the US. You know what I mean? So the even things like financial resources, the ability to stock up, to have reserves and all that comes into it. So inequality is a massive risk amplifier, and it's much more justified to feel eco-anxiety if you're in a country that doesn't have all those safety nets. Adanse, would you like to share a little bit about how you see sort of young people being stressed or mentally stressed, emotionally stressed by the fear of existential risks manifesting in their lifetime or maybe already manifesting now?
Hello, everyone. My name is Adanze from Nigeria. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So in Nigeria here, young people are actually scared. Personally, I am scared because a lot is happening and there's nobody explaining to people why the things that are happening the way it is happening. The heat is crazy. It could rain in the morning, and in less than 30 minutes, just after the rain, there is an enormous amount of heat that you cannot even explain where it's coming from. People are asking questions, and a lot of people, especially the uneducated ones, are beginning to think, oh, it's spiritual. So that's why I personally feel the need and see the need for climate literacy, to tell people, to educate people about what is actually going on. Because down here, there is flood. There's not just heat. There is flood destroying communities. There's rising heat. There's food inflation. There is insecurity. There's a whole lot that somehow comes down at the end of the day, all boils down to climate change. So it raises fear, and it makes it worse because of the high level of unemployment. When people are even unable to fend for themselves and cater for themselves, then combine it with the stress of climate change, it's a whole lot for the young people in Nigeria. And like Ricardo said, climate change will affect all of us, but it will affect us differently. I work mostly with young people and girls, and the way climate change affects men or boys is completely different from how it affects women and girls. Their experience is totally different. And there is nobody telling them why the experience is different or explaining why things are happening the way they are happening. So you would see a boy saying, oh, there is heat. And you see a girl saying, oh my God, this heat is too much. And then the boy is, the heat is not that much, but he cannot understand why the girl is feeling the heat the way she is feeling the heat. You know, all of this boils down to, personally, I think it affects the mental well-being of the young people around me. I've seen firsthand how waste management, down here, waste management is a serious challenge. My last COP initiative activity for last week, part of my activity was for the students to collect waste from their environment. And it will shock you the number of cartons and PET bottles that they were able to come up with. And you're wondering if just about 30, 40 students can come up with this quantity, how much more is out there? And what happens to them when they get into the environment? People need to know that, okay, this is what they should be doing with these things. People are really trying though. I see a lot of other young people, they are coming up with initiatives to battle all of these challenges. But I strongly believe that more needs to be done.
Thank you, Adanse. That's very sobering news from your country there, a very serious situation. And I know, I mean, some of the injustices too about, how do you deal with things like plastic pollution? Well, we collect all the plastic, and recycle it, but you don't really you're sending it to China and, oh, what, China doesn't want it anymore. Well, how about Indonesia, where they just dump it into the sea, or to Africa? A lot of the electronic waste, all this sort of shifting. And then you still have people also in the West saying, well, developing countries aren't doing enough about climate change. But if you're in such desperate, struggle, it's very hard to sort of say, well, okay, I need energy to cope with the heat, maybe air conditioning, something what, any kind of power source will do. Maybe, I don't know, is there still room for people to think ecologically under that kind of stress? Are they thinking, well, maybe we should rather have solar panels than a generator or so in the villages or so? How are people still making some kind of room for?
Okay, so down here, people are really opting for solar panels, but then again, solar panel is really expensive. And then we have the problem of our government, where you have fuel is even more expensive now too. The solar panel is also expensive. Buying the solar panels, the installation, even the import duties that you have to pay for the solar panels before they even come into the country. And then we have those in seats of authorities who are actually responsible for bringing these things. For instance, you could have maybe a politician or somebody that imports generators. Most of our elites own refineries. So as a result, they would not want to push policies that would support the use of solar panels. They would prefer that people would spend to buy fuel and generators as against opting for the option of solar panels. So you see small businesses that are trying to strive, small eco businesses, solar panel businesses that are trying to come up because of government policies and taxes on all of these things. It's difficult for these businesses to survive. So at the end of the day, the masses have no option but to still go back to fuel. So that's the major challenge.
Yeah. Yes, I know that at the COP conferences, there's been a lot of discussion about climate justice and investment and aid, and it's really disheartening to see how the sort of countervailing movements, especially in the US, are cutting aid programs and being hostile to any kind of concessions. Also for the fact that a lot of developing countries have not contributed significantly to the climate change problem in the first place. So anyway, Lorenzo, I know you're working on a paper on how that some of that anxiety actually is manifest in popular culture too. Did you want to say a few words about that before I hand over to Ash? Ash, I sent you a direct message. Just have a quick look in the chat. Yeah,
Well, I mean,
Lorenzo.
rather than a paper is part of the articles that we have in the extra info hub. I actually invite all the panelists to, if they have time, to later on send us any thought piece that they could write off to put their ideas and their opinions, their perspectives into paper, because we will be happy to have them in the info hub. And yeah, it's interesting because we are talking about everything that it's happening like it's not really being covered in the media, but people is just ignoring it. And we've refused to believe the possibility of reaching these dystopian scenarios where half of a continent, or well, not a continent itself, but like a really big part of a country, for instance, could disappear. And I'm not talking about the Micronesia or the Polynesia states, but I'm talking about half of Florida, that if the sea rise keeps going up, it's just going to disappear. And the United States is the most powerful country on earth, and it's still incapable of going against Mother Nature. Therefore, the thought piece is actually exploring how existential threats have become, let's say, work of popular culture, and we have all these movies about artificial intelligence and robots and then becoming our masters. Yeah, but that could happen. That could happen. That could eventually happen. And we are refusing to see it that way. And then we have other movies like this one that came a long time ago that is called 2012, about the end of the world and how it was just going to collapse because the Mayan calendar was finishing that time. And it turns out that it was just a climate collapse because we went overdue with how we were exploiting Earth. And we still refuse to pay attention to the siren songs coming from pop culture about how we are truly destroying Earth. So this thought piece is just exploring precisely that and how we might be doing harm but not taking it too seriously. Seeing how the world is ending on video games and movies and series, but not facing it as a real possibility. Which
Yeah,
at
that's
the end of
such
the
a
day,
yeah.
it's what it's going to be, and that I believe also feeds the helplessness that the youth can feel in some occasions. We do not have enough hope core in our social media or hope core in the general news from media outlets or in movies, and that's a shame because
Yeah.
I believe that the responsibility of young people is to be uh, how can I say it without it's to bring joy and initiative and energy to things because we do have the energy to do it. But if we feel depressed due to the whole environment that it's around us, it's just truly difficult to have the initiative to change anything.
Okay, thank you, Lorenzo. And that touches on what I said earlier about, the greater optimism or the greater component of utopia in our imaginary in my generation, in my youth. And I think we could do with a bit more utopia because you're quite right. We do also have the means to create a very much better future. It is within our power to do that. But now I'm going to hand over to Ash to moderate the next question because we are co-hosting. So Ash, if you would just like to continue.
Indeed, thank you. Thank you very much. This has been a very stimulating, informative, and inspiring and passionate round. And I'd love to pivot the conversation a little bit to really, I guess, take forward some of the important points that everybody here's brought up already. We've talked about geopolitics a little bit, and I'd like to delve into this a bit more because as we know, we are confronted with the eternal challenge of how leadership and many different levels, from politics to business and so on, and civil society, are focused on, particularly in politics, focused on near-term, results, re-election, and so on. And this is at the cost of longer-term interests. And the longer-term interests, of course, are related to climate change, but all of the many things you've talked about here, whether it's war, it's disease, it's hunger. Professor Thomas, you brought up an important point because during the COVID pandemic, we lost a lot of people to hunger, a lot more people to hunger than to even in COVID. And these are inequalities, and of course, the most vulnerable are hit the hardest. So I wanted to sort of take this conversation one step forward and ask the wonderful leadership in this room, questions about what you would like to share in terms of reflections, from reality and on ground context from where you are, and where does this sort of, what can I say, this dichotomy of longer term interests, of humanity and society versus short-term goals that a lot of our leadership are focused on, and how that's playing out, in each of your respective contexts. And we've got a lot of geographic diversity here, so perhaps I could follow a similar, route as we did in the previous conversation, and ask Philo, if Philo, you would be willing to share a little bit about what the context is in India, particularly in Tamil Nadu, and how do we weigh this out based on those realities?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ash. I think beyond everything, what stands out to me personally is governments are able to take drastic measures when pandemic hits. Governments are able to take drastic measures for defense when there is war, but are unable or unwilling to take the same kind of drastic measures necessary to address the climate change. So this is something that throughout the world we have been working hard to tackle, and I think it's a long way to go. But that aside, if you, I think, compare with 20 years from before and now, I'm sure we have come a long way. We have governments with targets, who have set targets on emission reductions, who are integrating biodiversity conservation, pollution prevention in their own policies and trying to implement them. We also have businesses who are trying to bring in the language of climate action by talking about emissions reduction, carbon credits in their own language. And we also have civil society across sectors articulating some form of environment in the work that they do. So I think that is a progress that has undeniably been achieved in the past 2 decades. Nevertheless, this seems nowhere to be enough. And what recent events like the geopolitical issues have shown us, climate change becomes just another issue that can be sidelined. So that is one thing. Another thing, I think no matter how hard you try, report on your NDCs, submit your reports to the UN about your SDG progress and so on, I don't think anything much is going to change in terms of addressing this issue unless, we start reorienting how we have lived. So there has been a fundamental rift between the nature and ourselves. That is something we all know. And the amount of manufacturing for our consumption only continues to increase. So no amount of green energy projects or energy transition is going to be enough for the steady growth in consumption. And even if developing nations like the US or Europe are able to cut down their emissions, it would be at the expense of other third world countries to whom they are pushing their own manufacturing onto. So unless we rethink, and this cannot be only blamed on the governments, but also these banking institutions and international institutions who define what GDP is. They are the ones who are defining what growth is. And even if they finance our loss and damage or climate adaptation method of a measure of a country, they define how we are going to do about it. So how are we going to value indigenous knowledge? How are you going to value intergenerational justice when you are going to follow a method that comes top down from a very capitalistic market oriented standpoint? So I think defense and geopolitics has taken a centerfold because it affects the markets. Climate change has not affected the markets. In fact, it is also benefiting the markets in different ways, which is why I feel the leaders are unhesitant to act on. Personally, in my state, in Tamil Nadu, we have been quite proactive in terms of governance. So there is a climate action state level committee. There are state level, district level vulnerability assessments and plans. There are youth who are being increasingly involved in these spaces as green fellows. So there are spaces to make a difference, but they are going to be nowhere enough unless it's dealt with at a more fundamental basis. Thank you.
That's really enlightening, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, all of the consequences, and we're going to face much more of this. They're going to be more. There's going to be more conflict. There's going to be more wars and displacement. I think Danze had alluded to a very important point in the previous, remark she had made, which is that there's huge differences in terms of gender. The implications of all the displacement. I mean, there's been recent data that's come out about even the conflict in the Middle East and the implications for women and girls. So we're going to have much more disparity. You're absolutely right, and thank you for sharing the context in Tamil Nadu. Of course, I know that you yourself, Philo, are doing a lot of work on policy. We need to magnify the role of young people so that young people are much more. Young people are leaders of today and tomorrow, and we need young people to be part of the policy process and certainly amplifying voices. I think those voices from the ground are crucial. So thank you for sharing that. I'll ask Rick if you could speak to the context. Certainly in Venezuela, I know I want to also share that Rick himself is if I may has been displaced on account of the crisis and is personally facing the ramifications of this. But from Venezuela to Argentina to Brazil, and I'll ask you to comment if you could, please, Rick, on your perspective, your experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ash. I think migration comes with a lot of wisdom because migration provides knowledge that you cannot just access to it via online websites. The thing is that Venezuela is a country that offers a few data. We don't have a lot of data available to properly discuss what's actually going on there. And there is a lot of information that is not being publicly that's also very concerning, specifically when it comes to indigenous groups. Because we know that Venezuela and right now I'm living in Brazil, both countries share the Amazon rainforest that we know is at a tipping point at this moment. One thing that I would like to highlight that two of the main problems that Venezuela is facing are related to wildfires and also heavy rains. Just to give you some perspective, from 2008 to 2014, around 200,000 Venezuelans were displaced. Those are considered climate refugees. There is a problem right now, and not just in Venezuela, I think in many countries, that we are not acknowledging and we are not addressing climate refugees. If you go to a country to request refuge, they won't list, climate, let's say, risk or threat as a reason, but it is. And remember that now that Venezuelans are one of the most displaced groups, surpassing any other in history. And part of that group actually are related to people that, are climate refugees. So that's also very important to know, but not everything it has to be, let's say, black and sad. Actually, Venezuela is taking slowly, it's actually taking steps. I might say from private investors and so on solar panels, electric cars. It's also it's something that is starting to be right now at the country. Even though we were facing in Venezuela, they are facing a lot of power issues at the moment as we are speaking. And me myself, I live on what was a total blackout, a national blackout. So. I've been seeing that also when I went to Argentina. It paired with the transition, the government transition, and with the President Milei right now taking action. But I also saw a lot of, let's say, stakes actually away from the general goal. Starting, we have leaders right now in the world that are not acknowledging what is happening when it comes to climate issues and climate threats. And I saw that myself when living there, and how, for example, these activists are being, I won't say persecuted, but how they are being actually treated in when they are doing public manifestation, which is a constitutional right many of us have. The same happened in Venezuela. You cannot go with the open message and speak about the situation. It will bring a lot of attention, and in that case, negative attention from government members. I have to say that Brazil has been a nice surprise in my experience, because, for example, I live in one of the most sustainable cities in the whole country, but also in one of the most sustainable cities in the South Hemisphere. Why? Because Curitiba is an example of what is possible if we not just have governments, we also have private investors and people taking action. Uh, I might say that in Brazil in 2024, it surpassed more than 50% of the energy supply was actually renewable energy, and that's something very positive. And here in Curitiba, I might say that a lot of cars right now are actually electric. And what is more interesting that we tend to think that, for example, these alternatives tend to be pricier in many ways, but they are not actually. The options that are available here are more affordable than any other options. It's for me right now, it's more affordable to get an electric car here in Curitiba than to get, a gas car. So there are things that we need to understand that when we put our minds to it as communities, when we acknowledge, when we address, and we understand what is actually happening, we don't try, to keep it away or to hide it from people. And that's the thing that happens a lot in Venezuela, for example, in Argentina, for example, what's happening right now at the Patagonia, what's happening in the Amazon rainforest. So the thing is that we need leaders, and we need to choose leaders, because the leaders, we choose them. That's the interesting part. We choose our leaders, and we need leaders that are actually are open not to receive feedback and to act based on that. Because there's a lot of feedback coming from institutions, scientific scientists, and so on. Then we can do a lot with that information. It's not like we are taking opinion-based action, because this is what we're discussing. It's not opinion-based. So I just want to highlight that, and I think that we are stronger as long as we are together. So if we're together, we're strong, and we need to keep that in mind, because what we're facing right now is actually a threat, a human threat, it's a life threat. Climate action, climate change, not to take it lightly, is actually a very serious topic. And just to finish this idea, I must say that recently I was doing a lot of reading about stilt houses and stilt communities. Brazil is a country that has a majority of people living in stilt houses, not just indigenous people, but also actual communities. For example, in Sao Paulo, the president himself came from one of those communities. And the threat that they're facing, we have 30,000 people actually facing a direct threat because of floods just right now in that small community. So what are the actions that are being taken? And that's just one community that is considered favela. It's not even they are not even segmented between, still houses, still communities, different type of favela. No, we here have favelas, we have developed infrastructure communities, and we lose a lot to that, black and white. And I think there's a lot of the conversation that is being missing between the black and white. We don't need to see things black and white because climate change is not black and white. And it won't be black and white to all of us. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank
Yeah,
you, Rick. I think that's you brought up a lot of very important points, and indeed, I think magnifying a lot of stories, about the fact that there's a lot of sense, business sense in sustainable approaches, which is, and I think Philo also alluded to the fact that we're insatiable in our need to consume. I think for working with communities, individuals, education. Danze talked about that. These are all really important things because we need the behavior change. We need to elect the right leaders. We need to magnify the fact that there's a lot of business sense in going sustainable with greener and cleaner technologies. And those are not only more sustainable in terms of the environment, but also in terms of business practice. And that together we can do this. But we have to have an aware and active society that makes the right decisions even at election time, because we are the ones voting in our leadership. And thank you for sharing the example from Curitiba. I think is a very fascinating one. I'm going to ask our brother Kamal to share his perspective, and particularly, from I know the work he's doing in Nigeria, but also in Turkey. If you could, share some reflections with us as well from the context that you're familiar with. Kamal, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ash, for giving me the floor. And in Turkey, like there are a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to these climate issues and also the problem of the region, as well as the recent war between the US and at the same time Iran. So even though over the past years there has been some progress, I consider it's still insufficient. And I also like that there's a problem of how will business thrive if we keep on coming up with new policies. So which also makes it a challenge. However, there still remains alignment between policy and also broader forces shaping this global stability, and also now it's deeply connected to geopolitics and development systems. For example, now if we look at Turkey, for example, we can say that this problem of energy crisis has really shaped the way things have been done. And also, when these energy routes are disrupted, it becomes like a geopolitical conflict. And at the same time, going back by these dynamics, we consider that there's a problem of energy security and trade routes, and also migration period, and also regional stability. So Turkey is really highly exposed to such problems. And at the same time, if we take example of city like Istanbul, which is very big, there's issue of water. So even 2 to 3 years ago, there was even a problem of how to come up with sustainable ways in order to ensure that there's enough water for all in Istanbul. At the same time, last year we experienced the same thing in Ankara. So this is also a lot of problems in the region, also in the country at large. So which says that we cannot succeed in isolation, because we have to deal with these realities, and at the same time we have this global tension. We can see how even UAE is not part of OPEC. And at the same time, we can say that in some ways, Turkey is trying to come with new policies in order to solve this problem of crisis, and also of this of injustice. So from what we do normally in Turkey, we try to bring youth together from different countries, because the good thing about Turkey and also where we are is that we are from different countries. So normally we try to organize different programs to address this problem. And I can remember in order to address this problem, we had a program with organizations last year, Vision Africa, and as well as Indonesia Backfill, where we brought people from different countries and also from Turkey, since we want them to understand what it is all about. and also how together we can even like solve this problem. So what we are doing now is that this year we are trying to, like, thanks to pop movement and also the initiative, we are trying to engage youth more and more and also bring them together. And we are trying to even come, because even though like we have people from different cities, we are trying to see how we can even like organize like some sessions with them. So I can say that what I do personally, also what we do with all organizations, we are trying to make sure that all people understand that this is a problem that affects all of us. And also we understand that this is what shapes our everyday decisions. So ultimately, it's all about awareness and at the same time coordination. And also we believe that like this instability needs to be addressed. So what I can say is that as I feel from different backgrounds, because we have people from even though they are based in Turkey, but also they are based in different areas where they're really affected by this climate change. And also we see that if we don't take action, it's going to be a big problem. And what I can say is that now we are trying to like bring even like people, even if they are not based in Turkey, but they have this climate awareness to even come to Turkey and address this problem. All of us that like so that all of us can have a better understanding. So all in all, what I can say is that like it's a really serious problem, and we are trying to take advantage of the upcoming COP in order to see how we can even address this issue properly.
Amazing. That's really amazing. I just want to highlight also that Kamal, you do a tremendous job of collectivizing people. I've seen that, I mean, across the board. You know how to mobilize, you know how to collectivize, and I think this is very critical. And I'm sure the COP will, elevate this, this important work that you're doing that you've described is pivotal to achieving what we're trying to achieve here. So thank you very much, Kamal. I'll ask Adanze if she would share a few words presenting the Nigeria context. We'd love to hear from you, and thank you. Oh, Adanze, I think we're missing your audio. I can see that you're saying something, but we can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Okay, so when you think about climate change in the Nigerian context, the problems we face generally as humans, especially as Nigerians in this country, are so interconnected in the sense that we are dealing with environmental action, social justice, lack of youth inclusion, education, and then there's a big problem of long-term leadership, right? But here in Nigeria, like Philo said, a lot is being done. There are so many youth-led organizations that are doing so much. People are organizing seminars, people are speaking up, young people are trying to see that they are speaking up, they're organizing seminars and trying to educate people when it comes to climate change. But at the end of the day, it is not nearly enough, like she says. CSOs alone and NGOs cannot single-handedly handle this problem. When I spoke about long-term leadership, I'm talking about coming from the aspect of continuity, right? We have so many policies, so many structures and programs that have started out to combat climate change. The minute there is a change in government, those projects are abandoned and then new projects are started from scratch. It becomes difficult for programs and projects to be completed. That is to say that we have a continuity problem, right? Programs are actually effective, but because they are not continued to end to ensure long-term effects. I mean, when we don't finish them, a new government comes in and they abandon the old project and come in with their own initiative. At the end of the day, we have so many abandoned programs and projects after each government cycle. And then when it comes to education, I am a big advocate when it comes to education and catching them young. You cannot expect young people to inherit the consequence of our decisions if you do not involve them in decision making, right? And the only way we can involve them in decision making is when we have a curriculum review. When I talk about curriculum review, I'm talking about going all the way to primary schools, nursery schools, because you cannot begin to introduce environmental management and climate change to students at university level without giving them the basics. They would not be able to follow. But if there is a curriculum review for students where climate change and sustainability is gradually introduced to them in simpler terms before they grow up to face the complex situations and nature of sustainability, it becomes easy for them to be involved in decision and policy making. It becomes easy for them to truly trust the consequence of the decision that we have made on their behalf in the future. But if we do not involve them in these processes, at the end of the day, we hand over to them a future that is already dilapidated without preparing them properly on how to combat that future. So for me, I would say that it's important that we inculcate sustainability at very early stages. Therefore, so doing, we have the intergenerational solution whereby we have the old people caring for the young people. At the end of the day, the young people will care for the old people in their old age. Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Please,
Ash, if
yes,
I may bring
Thomas.
myself back in there, because it's
Please.
a nice lead over to the final question that I would like to ask. And we're running out of time. People have asked whether we're going to have some questions from the floor, and we do want to do that. And we've got maybe 13 minutes left, so we have to be quick. So I'm going to ask each of you, just, and including you, Ash, just in a sentence. I think I get the message that young people feel excluded from decision making, and they feel the political process is failing them clearly at every level. Look at Turkey having water problems next door. Desalination plants are bombed. I can't think of a better symbol of this the failure of the political process at different levels nationally. Also, we have corruption in a lot of countries and so on. And I can see, it's difficult to watch that from your perspective, but you are also, your generation will take over the lead, and I think you personally will probably be in leading roles. And what will you do differently, or what do you think is this? How would you approach things differently? And at the same time, it's how leaders should be doing it now, but. So in a way, what's your idea of good governance, of doing things right? Ash, if I can start with you, perhaps.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I think that's a crucial question. I think inclusiveness is a very key element of this. And I think it's appeared very apparent from the conversation we've had so far. I think amplifying voices of young people, certainly facilitating the intergenerational exchange comes with great value. But unless we are inclusive, especially of those who are often left out of these conversations, who have who are the ones who are the ones who will receive a lot of the ultimate implications of policies and decision making, indigenous communities, women, girls, youth, unless we have communities included at every step of the process, it's going to be very difficult. So I do want to say, in terms of the way that uh, governance would ideally be set up and should be set up, would be very inclusive.
Very true, Ash. And because if you include people, they're also much more likely to support your agenda, to actually own it. Okay, Philo, would you like to say a few words? How would you do it? How should they do it?
It's very close to what Dr. Ash said, because I have some experience being in policy space, and there is usually a focus on these aggregate large data sets for decision making. And like Ricardo said, there is no black and white in this issue. It's extremely complex. So unless you involve the community who are going to be who face the implications of this policy, do it in a participatory manner, ground up knowledge building, citizen science, promote all of this, so that if you are promoting a so-called green energy policy, you understand as a policymaker, decision maker, implications of it, and how can you offset without infringing upon the rights of the people who live in the regions for other abstract benefit. So I think going forward, these are the considerations that we need to prioritize. And if young people are going to be in governance spaces, they need to foreground community voices and the concerns from a justice standpoint. Thank you.
It's what's called stakeholder consultation in the development sector, but I think it's really a profound issue. It's perhaps a little bit technical to call it that, and I think it's more about valuing people, valuing everyone and not being selfish. And we've just had, some 40 years of neoliberalism telling us we should be selfish and greedy is good and all that. It's not. We need to think beyond ourselves and our self-interest. We have to think with an eye to other people's legitimate concerns, whether it's in global diplomacy or whether it's in national or local policy making everywhere. Anyway, Ricardo.
Yes, thank you. So I think what we need to aim collectively is for democracy. Fernando Savater, he's an Spanish philosopher, once said that democracy is a circle of permanent and constant learning. And I think as long as we are learning and we're sharing our opinions, we're sharing our ideas, we can collectively build something that is functional and positive for everybody. Because it's possible. We see what we can do together as a society when we have the COVID-19 going on. You know, how fast we were able to find options, more than one option actually, to how to cope with the situation. And that allows us to be at the current level that we have. So the thing is that we need to aim for democracy, and I think it's totally possible and totally doable. But we need also to educate people on that. And democracy also implicates that we need to listen to feedback, that we need to put the ego as aside. Because let me tell you this: there's a lot of politicians who has a lot of ego. And we cannot face collective issues from the ego, because ego, it just blinds us. It not allows us to see the whole picture of what's going on. Or listening to people, for example, spaces like this are allowing us to do so. And just one more thing. Yes, youth are being excluded from decision-making tables, but at the same time, there are many groups taking place right now, and there are many ways that youth are being letting themselves be heard. So I think what we need to do is, if you know about a group that you might be interested in joining, the pop movement, be it the pop movement, be it any group, just reach out, because collectively we're strong. Thank you.
It's true. I was thinking before, somebody mentioned how conflict it can be increased in crisis, but I've seen here in Australia about 10 years ago we had a bushfire here that killed 200 people and stopped about 10 kilometers from my house. So we're very lucky, we're saved by a wind change. But we're a very individualistic society, and yet it was amazing to see how in a crisis people can also pull together. It was heartwarming. It was amazing. I was deeply touched by seeing how people can also rally in a crisis. Okay, Kamal, how would you do it differently? How should it be done?
Yeah, the central issue is not just
How
lack
are
of
you doing it
awareness.
differently? You're already into it from what I hear from, organizing people.
Yeah, the central issue is not it's not lack of awareness, but a clear gap between recognition and also level of coordination, which is like the action that is been taken so far. And also what stands out the most is that these challenges are no longer separate. For example, climate stress, economic uncertainty, migration, technological disruption, and also this tension in this geopolitical tension that we are having. So if we reflect on what should be done differently from what is currently being done, the first shift is towards embedding the injustice between the intergenerations, which is like a real action-making principle, where long-term impacts on future generations are central to how policies are designed and evaluated. And at the same time, we need to shift toward moving from reactive governance to preventive system-based planning that is prioritizing resilience across climate, economic, and social structures before crises even escalate. And
Yes.
and what I also see is that we need to ensure that youth participation is very structural rather than symbolic, where people are meaningfully included in shaping, not just responding to policies that define their future. So I see that this is very vital, and also it's about how we are going to coordinate things, not just now, but for the future.
Okay, that's very true. I mean, we had our budget night here in Australia today, and there was a big announcement about how we're going to build new fuel reserves for a fuel crisis such as now. Of course, always after the fact, and that's, it can be fatal to act after the fact when you already know that something is a crisis is likely to happen. So foresight is very important. Adanse, finally. What's your recipe?
Okay, for me, what I would do differently is I think it's time we shift leadership from reactive thinking to preventive thinking. Because most systems around the world, at least what I am used to here, we have a situation where responses to crisis only become severe after the crisis. There is no measures are seriously put in place before the crisis. But once the crisis has happened, you will see government, CSOs, and people running around to find solutions after it has happened. For instance, we know that there are rainy seasons every year. We know when this will happen, but you would not see communities or people clearing their clearing their gutters and their drainage systems until when it has officially entered the raining season, and then you see people hurriedly trying to clean up the environment when it has already started raining. How about cleaning up the environment and clearing out the drainage before the raining season officially begins? How about making provision for proper waste management and disposal before the heat becomes too big? So I also think that it is important for us to stop looking at climate action as a development, as an environmental issue, and start seeing it as a development issue, because climate change and climate action is treated differently, separately from economic planning, public health, and other things, when in fact climate change affects all of these things. All right, so I think it's time we start treating climate change and climate action as a development issue, not just as an environmental problem. And then when it comes to education, like I would always say, it's time to go back to the roots. It's time to start grooming our young people right from when they are small, when they are still very young. And then finally, I think it's, even though until recently, I think until early last year, I didn't see it as so much of a topic for discussion. People hardly talk about eco-anxiety and mental well-being when it comes to climate change. We don't talk about what the heat does to us mentally. We don't talk about what, for countries that have snow, we don't talk about what happens to them when they are locked up in their homes for days, unable to go out or have access to their loved ones. We just see it as something that is normal. For instance, oh, there is heat. It's normal. We don't talk about what it does to us mentally. So I think it's time we normalize having talks about eco-anxiety and mental well-being when it comes to climate change.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's amazing. I think you give me some hope that we might see some better leadership. It won't be very hard to beat the current variety of leaders, which leave us all very frustrated. That's of course a generalization, and there are also some very good people who are doing their very best to change things. We have one question in the chat. I not know whether you've seen it. Ash, would you like to respond to that on climate's regenerative capacity by Rajendra, if I pronounce that correctly? Or I don't know whether we can promote him to speak. Lorenzo, are you able to do that as co-host?
I will be able to do that.
Oh, Harini, yeah. Harini, if you're still there. I didn't know whether you were there or not. Thank you. Yes, okay. Let's see, go for it. We can't see you yet, but or maybe just speak.
He's rejoining as a panelist. One moment.
Oh, rejoining us. Okay.
There he is.
Okay.
Hello. It's so inspiring to see wonderful young leaders, taking up the issue. Perhaps it is something for my generation as a Gen X. We didn't pay a lot of attention, and hopefully you'll inspire more people and then reach to a much broader leadership base. My question is regarding the nature's regenerative capacity. And first of all, I'd like to salute Ricardo's points on things not being black and white. And obviously, EU is trying to limit and completely phase out diesel vehicles, but they are going to be exported somewhere else. My question is on the regenerative capacity of nature. So during COVID, there were more rains. The air quality was just supreme because only people who really had to drive or who really had to ship goods were in the traffic. So have you had similar experiences? And and how would you bring that up to COP31? Thank you very much. And on the geopolitical part, there's always escalation, de-escalation. And whilst there's escalation, de-escalation, some people are profiting, say both in America, but also in Iran and several other countries. That's also something, an area that you should always investigate. Thank you.
Thank you. Ash, would you like to respond? Oh, you have to unmute. Sorry, you're not unmuted, Ash. Hold on, we can't hear you.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kamal, would you like to reflect, please?
Okay, yeah, like as we all know, looking at what has been happening for over 4 years, especially if you look at what happened between Russia and Ukraine, we can say that geopolitically Turkey benefited from it. So in some ways, yeah, it's not good for others, but good for Turkey because like Turkey benefited especially by serving as the mediator between Russia and Ukraine, and at the same time the US. So we can say that like like when it comes to geopolitics, yeah, we can say that they are winners and they are losers. So in this case, like Turkey took advantage of this, which also helped Turkey addressing the issue of crisis and also climate change. And if I could recall, like 3 to 4 years ago, even Turkey discovered its own gas. So I can say that like it also helped the country economically. So yeah, as you mentioned, like yes, as question of de-escalation, it all depends on where the country stands. And in this case, being in Turkey and what I've experienced so far, I can say yes, it's always Turkey benefited. And now looking at what is happening between the US and Iran, and we can look at Pakistan. Pakistan is doing the same thing. So it's all about the location, and also it's all about how you take advantage of the situation. And at the same time, it's also like a chance for other countries to come with new initiative. For example, now we can see that because of the energy crisis, some countries are trying to come up with new measures to tackle this problem, like even in terms of using like less fuel, and at the same time, some are even opting for electric cars. So yeah, and now as we are going to have COP, I believe that some will come up with this issue to be addressed.
Okay, thank you, Kamal. Anyway, we need to wrap up. We've gone quite for over 90 minutes, which is quite a marathon. And I thank you all very much for your contributions. And I think we're going to continue our conversation. I'd certainly like any and all of you to be actively involved in extra if you can and help us out. We certainly could do with some help. You probably know a lot more about social media than we do, and so we're also looking for volunteers, and if we can in any way collaborate and support your work, also we're very happy to do so. And it's wonderful to talk to you, Ash. Would you like to
Thank you
say?
very much. It's been a great pleasure, and I hope we can continue to do a lot more together. And I just want to thank the incredible young leaders that join us here, and all those who are not in this room but are doing some amazing things. So thank you. Just keep on keeping on, and we're together in this, and I'm sure we're going to get there. I do believe hope is an intervention. I know hope was alluded to in our conversation. We're going to definitely. Get stronger together. And thank you very much, Professor Router, Lorenzo, Ricardo, Kamal, Philo, Adanze, and to everybody, and to all of us. Thank you ever so much. It's been
Lorenzo, would you like
absolutely
to have the
wonderful.
final word? We've skipped you on a couple of questions because we were running out of time. I apologize, but I'll give you a final word.
Oh my God, no, that's too much pressure. I don't want to have
Come
the
on.
last word. I
You
prefer the
can do
last word to
it.
be on the rest of the panelists. I would just like to say that hopefully we're going to keep having events such as this one. We will be glad to later on invite you to different interviews, podcast style, just for one of the different members of the pop family. I think that will be fantastic, especially a section completely dedicated to young leaders, where we reach out not only to you, but also other members of your own network, maybe reaching out to participants of previous networking events, such as the Young Think Tankers that was promoted by Southern Voice, and different initiatives just like that one. So if you would like to help us with such a section like that one, or an initiative like that one, please reach out, or we are going to reach out to you anyway and
And
chase you down.
I'm going to do it
Thank
right
you
now
very much.
because for next month we're looking for some speakers who have expertise on water. If you have anyone in your network,
Sure,
please let us
sure.
know. So there's
Thank
many
you.
opportunities on specific topics where we can collaborate. Anyway, wonderful to have you here. Thanks to our audience for staying with us for this long, and until next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank
Bye
you so
bye.
much. God
Thank you very
bless.
much.
Have a beautiful day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you
Okay.
so
Bye-bye.
much. Have fun, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Okay. How many we can